I've divided this into 5 pieces: what I believe, what I see, what I teach, what I do, and how I work. And what I believe is this simple idea that whatever the question, design is the answer. Most people don't believe that at all. I truly believe it. And I also believe that to really truly design well, you've got to understand that before an answer can be provided, you've got to do your homework, you've got to do your research. What I see in the field is a changing ground where architects are involved in less than 5% of all buildings in this country, and where probably less than 5% of that 5% is actually architecture or design at all. That's a tough ground to deal with. What that tells me is that everything we do as designers, particularly in the field of architecture, has to make a big difference, because we have such a small sliver of the pie that if you don't take advantage of that and make a statement and do something that's meaningful and real and beautiful and performs well, there's never a chance of gaining any ground against the status quo. I see a changing ground marked by paradigm shifts in the way architects practice that necessarily mean we've got to teach differently. And I see a world where changing ground in visualization, and representation, and technology. And that's a hard thing to catch up with in academia, but I'm truly convinced if we don't teach differently and address those problems, we're not going to be putting out architects that can deal with the future of the world. What I teach, I'm going to show you just a couple examples of some projects that I've done with students. The first one was an architectural record sponsored a competition with Tulane University in 2006. And that was in the aftermath of Katrina. And of course, Katrina was a disaster. It was hard on people. It was hard on that city. That city may never recover. The people of the 9th Ward were just, their lives were trashed. And as a result of that, government came in with a lot of new regulations, stipulations, building codes, development codes, and made it even tougher, in a way, to operate in the field of architecture and design. It was viewed as more and more constraints, but the way we approached the studio was to take those constraints, make them look like assets versus liabilities. I taught this with 2 colleagues. We changed the way we taught. We taught as a team of 3 with 30 students. We partnered with one of the biggest developers in California who came in and lectured to the students, and we partnered with a prefabrication plant in Oregon. Record awarded 19 awards out of a field of over 600 entries. Our school took 5 of those 19 awards, including the 2 highest honors. And this project is by a young gal, Megan Quinn, in my studio. She was only 22 years old at that time. And Record came out to say later that they had a professional and a student category. They came out to say later that really the student category pushed the margins farther than the professional category. This is another winning entry by a team of two of my students, Mark Stanke and John Kacharski. And this is another one that won one of the 2 honor awards, grand prizes. Actually, one of the most timid students I've ever had won this whole thing. Her name was Jessica Jellison. And I took my studio in particular and challenged the typological standards of that area and tried to deal with the typology, but do it in a very aggressive and contemporary manner. I've done a lot of partnering with people. I've partnered with Yellowstone. I've been working with them for 8 years. And I partner with a nonprofit on the Big Island of Hawaii called the Kohala Center. I've partnered with them on 2 separate occasions. And the last time they called was to look at an historic ranch on the Big Island of Hawaii called the Kukaiao. It's one of the oldest ranches in the Hawaiian Islands. And they were suffering from operating in the red. They couldn't survive. It was family owned. And they wanted to see if there was a way to hold on to that place. And the typical pattern in Hawaii these days, this is common, everybody's losing land. They can't afford to make money in the industry they're in. So what they do is they start selling to developers. And you know where that leads us. And so we were charged with a plan to see how to save this place, keep it intact, have it operate, have it be fiscally responsible, and remain in the family. So I partnered with a a colleague out of the School of Business and a colleague out of the School of Agriculture, and the Kohala Center. We were lucky enough to get involved with one of the best land conservation easement attorneys in the country. We had great support. I had 8 students in this class, and when we were done with this project, we presented it to the owners, conservation easement attorneys, the family's lawyers, and that work that we did in 3 months with 8 students was valued at $500,000. I was stunned when they told us they thought that's what that work was done. And of course, this is all pro bono and a gift, and the plan is currently being implemented in its kind of very first stages. So we looked at all kinds of things. We looked at diversifying that ranch, and that's the key to any ranching and agricultural business anymore. You can't make money in it. It's very, very difficult. So you've got to look for other strategies to diversify what you do to make something happen. The first thing we did is looked at forming an institute that would have been managed by the Kohala Center in the core of the in the core village of the ranch, and that was the plan. There was to bring in multiple entities from MSU to do real-time research with faculty and students, looking at opportunities for diversification on that particular piece of land, and looking at restoration patterns, strategies, sustainable strategies, and so forth. So the real idea was to use this village as a place for intellectual capital, use that intellectual capital to save that place and set a new standard on the Big Island of Hawaii for rethinking this idea of, well, if you can't make it, then you sell, and you sell to developers. Energy, huge issue. They import all their energy. In fact, it's known now that the Hawaiian Islands have a 7-day food supply. So you can imagine what would happen, whether there's political unrest, whether there's environmental catastrophe. I mean, the list goes on and on and on, that they're extremely vulnerable. So we looked at energy strategies, taking them off the grid. We looked at, they have a huge erosion problem due to their loss of forest and grassland. We developed a permeable, non-toxic road infrastructure that doubled as a water gathering resource. We improved all their catchments. We phased in wind engine turbines and so forth. The islands are well known for koa and ohia, and sandalwood. They're incredible species of trees, but Weyerhaeuser and a number of other people have come through and taken all that forest. It's extremely valuable wood. So we looked at strategies to rebuild all the native species, which basically is a revenue resource, and it reduces erosion. It restores the grasslands. It's a really powerful way of bringing that environmental system back to what it should be. My colleague in the business school estimated that would bring $7 to $10 million of revenue a year to that ranch. We looked at all kinds of sustainable strategies for their ranching operation, including introducing a rotational grazing plan, a genetically consistent herd that was grass-fed. We looked at strategies for not shipping the cattle off the island, which usually go to California to a feedlot and then get shipped back to Hawaii. Kind of a ridiculous sort of economic idea. And we looked at restoring the community of Makoa Village. It used to be historically the place where you would go on New Year's Eve for a big party and things like that. And it's unoccupied now, and so we developed strategies to fold the community back into that place and make it a real community again, providing no-cost housing to employees who would, in exchange, harvest agriculture produced on the land. We looked at all kinds of government strategies, conservation plans, the forest stewardship plan, Native Forest Dedication Plan, National Historic Registry, and what this allowed us to do was basically defray a lot of cost of putting this infrastructure in because the government would step forward and provide a lot of funding with these plans. The entire project was based off this concept called the Ahupa'awa, which is a kind of historic cultural method for the division of land. And it was designed in a way that was based on natural topography, the environment, and providing every group of people with access to every resource on the island. So land was divided based on topography from the ocean to the top of Mauna Kea, giving every person on the island access to all of its resources. And that's basically, we took that concept and modernized it and made it, again, culturally specific. The other thing I'll say about this is when we presented this within the school, a lot of my colleagues were, they didn't understand it. They didn't think it was architecture. They didn't think it was relevant. And there was a really interesting discussion that ensued, because even with the people I teach with, I realized I was pushing the status quo of their understanding and conception of what architecture is and what it could be. The fact of the matter is, maybe we didn't do a lot of building and design a lot of buildings, but we designed an environment and we designed it spatially. And that was a hard idea to communicate to some of my colleagues. And I honestly, to this day, I still think they think we should have been doing something else. I vehemently disagree. Another project, nonprofit, Boulder, Colorado, the Conscious Alliance. Got a phone call from my oldest friend I grew up with as a child in my childhood. He works with these people. He said, "Hey, John, I want you to do me a favor." I said, "What's that?" He said, "I've got these guys. They live in Boulder. They're cool. They go to music venues. They collect food, and then they give it back to the community, to people in need. They want to do something bigger. They want to win a Guinness Book of World Record. They want a food drive that's bigger than they've ever done before." And so I agreed to do this. I had no idea how much it would be, how much work it would be. I thought it would be fun. It turns out it was fun. It turns out it was a ridiculous amount of work. We did win a Guinness Book of World Records, but the first thing I wanted to challenge with this project was, if you go look at the history of Guinness Book of World Records, particularly with this kind of stuff, it's all about making an object. You build a rocket that's 30 feet tall. You build this that's 50 feet tall. It's just about making an object. So what we wanted to do was communicate a message that had something to do with what the whole purpose of the food drive was about. So I went to the Xerox machine downstairs behind our front office, laid my hand down, Xeroxed it, picked up a can of I think it was Campbell's soup that was in the cupboard, put it back on the Xerox machine, Xeroxed that, spliced the two Xeroxes together, instantly had an idea for a project. Then we built a 3D model of it. You see that in the lower left-hand corner. That's a 3D print on our 3D printer. Then we transferred that in scale to scale we knew that where we could calculate the number of cans we would need. We CNC'd all those that cardboard formwork out in the school shop. We designed all that formwork so it could fold up and be carried on the plane with me. And then we went to Rothbury, the biggest music festival in the country, and we got there and we didn't realize what we'd ordered. And an 18-wheeler shows up with 40,000 cans of food, beans from Whole Foods that they donated, and actually it was 50,000 cans. Some were damaged in transit. We couldn't use them because you can't give them away to people in need. If there's any rust, any moisture on them, you cannot give them away. So we said we need 30,000 cans of beans and 15,000 cans of tuna. That's what we need to make this happen. It's all gravity-borne. There's no mechanical fasteners. And I had these 5 kids with me, and a colleague of mine, Kieran Fitzgerald, who's taught at the school, now works in Portland, Oregon. And we went out to build this thing, and we'd never built it. We would go to the food bank once a week and build little fingers of the hand holding the can. So we'd never built the whole thing. And we just built a little piece of it. And anyways, we negotiated a lot of violent storms, this, that, and the other thing, timing. And we got it done. It turns out Guinness had sent 2 people to watch us for the 3 days that we built it before the festival opened, making sure we didn't cheat. So anyway, that was just a really fun project, and again, I decided to do the project because it sounded like it'd be fun for a good cause. How many people do you know own a Guinness Book of World Records? I guess someone's busted that record. That's what people do with these things. But it was a lot of fun for a really good cause. Some of the work I've done, this won the Boston Society of Architects Unbuilt Architecture Award. It's an outrageous proposal for the Upper Bay of New York. The Upper Bay was historically one of the richest wetland areas in the world. It doesn't exist anymore. It's gone. It's gone due to development. It's gone due to chemicals. It's gone because of all kinds of horrendous things that we do and build. So I proposed something that, I mean, it's outlandish. I openly admit it. But this won the grand prize in that particular category. I proposed to do an artificial floating wetlands that occupied the space of the Upper Bay and was basically a liquid counterpoint to Central Park. And the way it was conceived was there's a lot of navigation channels, so on and so forth out there, and it was conceived as a series of floating islands that were delineated by all the unseen navigation channels that you would read off a maritime navigation chart. Flight paths into JFK and LaGuardia. So it made, what it did was it made visible something that was invisible. And again, I mean, a short project, a lot of fun, a lot of recognition, outlandish proposal. But I think that's, if you're not willing to step out there and do things like this, you're not gonna manage that line with the status quo. Another pretty outrageous project I did for the Pilchuck Glass School, one of the most famous glass schools in the world. Dale Chihuly, one of the founding members of that. I'm sure most of you are familiar with his work. Went out with a bunch of graduate students, spent a week with them, met Dale Chihuly, went to his studio, looked at a lot of glass work, spent 3 days on the campus, wrote a problem for the students, and oftentimes I will do my own version of a project with the students. Anyways, this idea came off of basically Dale Chihuly's work itself, which you see in the upper right, vessels within vessels within vessels. I counterpointed that with spaces and spaces and spaces carved out of a mass. Got a lot of flack for that image in the school too. Happy about it. Small project in Texas, trying to deal with the local typology down there. Very difficult. Married up several typologies of hunting blinds, cook shacks, and another typology. Project here in Bozeman, out on Sourdough. Clients wanted a 3-car garage. I didn't want to use the land, so we put a garden on their roof. Another project here called the Viewfinder House, turned everything on its ear, put all the living spaces in the upper floor versus the lower floor to capture all the great views from the site. Projects with Antoine Predock, who I worked with for 5 years, project architect on the Mesa Public Library, project on the Palm Bay Seafront Convention Center in Morocco, project architect on the Arizona Museum of Science and Technology, St. John the Divine Cathedral in New York, the North Transept. His work pushes the margins every day. He will never do something that doesn't push the margin. Rose House Theater of the Trees in Dallas, Texas. How I work. I believe it's the architect's obligation, privilege, and challenge to affect the built environment in the most positive way that she is able to enrich the specifics of place, people, and culture. Net result is most effective when it's forward-looking, reflecting the understanding that adjustment, adaptation, and the rendering of beauty are in fact the sign of a healthy, vital organism, which reveals our indisputable and unique ability to make positive change. Strategy, treat everything as a design problem. Do the research to make sure the question is understood. Be passionate about the people, place, and future. Be a whirling dervish of multiple choreographs. Embrace the challenge of being the David in a world of Goliaths. Don't be afraid. Face them, take them to the mat. Parting thought, a great quote by Friedrich Nietzsche: "Slack and sleeping senses must be addressed with thunder and heavenly fireworks. But the voice of beauty speaks gently. It creeps only into the most awakened souls." Thank you.
John, it seems like a lot of your work, the pro bono work, if you will, stuff that you weren't paid for, was really, thinking about problems in different ways and not necessarily what architects typically do as far as buildings, structures, of solving a problem. I'm just wondering, have you ever thought of a business model where that can actually happen on a regular basis, where you can do for-profit work and be able to give design to areas that wouldn't otherwise have design?
I have thought about that, and particularly with the work I've done in Yellowstone. I have brought Yellowstone National Park some of the best designers on the country on 3 separate occasions for a week, design charrettes, and those firms do their work pro bono as well. I have, after doing this for 8 years, I realized I've probably brought in excess to $5 to $6 million of free design services to the park. Not only have I brought that stuff to them, they're implementing it, they're using it. And in fact, this model is considered a new paradigm for operating in the parks, and the reason it's considered a new paradigm, they don't get the government funding that they need, and they never will. And so this has been recognized as a new model in DC. And what's been suggested to me is that I could take this model and open a consulting office and use this model with many parks in the country. So have I gotten there yet? No, I haven't. That could be that is a game changer. That's a big risk. But that's what I've considered I could do with that work.
John, I'm inspired by what you've done, and it really seems what this is an expression of a certain philosophy that you have about architecture and design. Colleagues at MSU, and I've kind of run into some of the same things, well, colleagues don't always get it, but something pretty crazy. How about people outside here that you've been able to connect with? Are there others who have kind of on their own come up with a similar philosophy or been inspired by your work, of which they are now partners in this view, I guess?
Yeah, I would say so. I would say for instance, my colleague Mike Everts, who occupies the office right next door to me, he has done, in a slightly different way, work here in Bozeman for two groups of people, actually both through Conrad Anker, the kind of world-known climber. He's done the Khumbu Climbing School, which is in Nepal and under construction right now. And he is also involved with the ice climbing facility slated for the fairgrounds. That would be a world-class ice climbing facility that would bring a lot of revenue to Bozeman. I would say he and I are on the same page about this. I would say he noticed what I was doing, and we talk about all kinds of. We just came up with a plan the other day for a new program in the school based on looking at things differently. The park definitely looks at things differently. The Kohala Center definitely looks at things differently as a result of some of that work. They now partner with Brown. They've partnered with Harvard. And they are doing things in a very different way now as a result of me doing 2 projects with them. So I'd say some people are looking up and taking notice.
Can you talk a little bit about your collaboration with Antoine Predock?
Oh, that's my collaboration with Antoine Predock. I met him when I was in graduate school. He was a guest one semester. His main office is in Albuquerque, New Mexico. My family owns a ranch in New Mexico. I graduated on a Friday from Harvard, went to work for the chair on Monday. Been on the East Coast for about 10 years at that point, and I wanted to come home to the West. And I said, well, wow, what a great deal. If I could go to work for Antoine, be in New Mexico, my family's ranch at the same time, that'd be the best of all worlds. So I packed up my stuff in a Ryder truck, drove to New Mexico, walked in the front door of his office with my stuff, and he just happened to be there in the front office that morning. He says, what are you doing here? I said, well, I'm either going to work for you next week or somebody else. And he said, where can I reach you? Gave him a phone number. He called me the next day, which was a Friday, and he said, you be here at noon tomorrow on Saturday. So I went to work for him, and you know, he changed my life, actually. I think he is instrumental in changing the way I view architecture. He's instrumental in what I consider research and important. He's instrumental in that nothing should be normative, and he's instrumental in you should always have fun with what you're doing. And I had 5 great years with him. I was his right-hand guy. I had a daughter, and I was on a plane so much and gone so much, I just said, I've got to take another risk. I've got to do something else because I'll never see my kid grow up. We still speak probably once a year. I consider him a true mentor, a great colleague, and a good friend.